This is Silver Bullion. I'm your host, James Cox. We've got a very special guest today. This is Otbert de Jong. Otbert, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Otbert, please could you give us a brief background as to your career so far?
Okay. I've been a banker for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
I moved out of banking about 7-8 years ago, went into risk consulting.
Okay.
And after risk consulting, working for one of the big four, I decided that at some point I wanted to do my own thing. So I went into venture capital a little bit, still in the space of risk and reward, and the space of financial services.
Okay, interesting. And which bank did you work for?
I worked for ABN AMRO Bank.
ABN AMRO. And what was your role there?
Many different roles. Served in 7 or 8 countries for the bank in different positions. I'm one of those kind of all-round bankers.
Okay.
But towards the end, I really started to specialize into risk management for financial services firms. So my last position was actually running a risk consulting business for ABN AMRO.
Okay, so risk is your sort of key expertise.
Yeah.
And during your time as a banker, you became extremely interested in the topic of systemic risk.
Yeah, particularly after 2008.
Okay, great. Well, could you just enlighten us as to what systemic risk is?
Systemic risk, if you look at financial institutions, they are all very kind of linked to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it means that one of them gets in trouble, like domino stones. One starts affecting the other, and they all start falling over in sequence. So systemic risk is basically that one financial institution getting into trouble and then infecting the next one. And these days, it's not only financial institutions anymore; it's also countries.
Okay. Why is it that one financial institution getting into trouble affects all the others?
Because they all owe money to each other. So if one financial institution owes money to another, then that other institution wants to be sure that at some point in time they're going to get their money back. So if that confidence starts to disappear, they will not roll over loans that are due.
Okay.
And that's when the trouble kind of really starts. It's not so much when the loans are not due, but when the loans become due and they're not extended, then the organization that has to pay back needs to scramble and get new funding, and that funding is obviously not going to be available, and therefore, technically they can go bankrupt.
Okay. You mentioned the 2008 crisis earlier. What's your analysis for its cause and its outcome?
Yeah, I think the cause is very generic. It could have been anything. In this case, it was the subprime mortgages, but it could have been anything. It's just a market that is very, for lack of a better word, pregnant. It's about to deliver. In this case, not something beautiful, but something nasty.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very tense market. And a little thing that can happen can just set off a whole chain of pretty unfortunate and nasty events.
Okay.
And that's also what happened in 2008. So in 2008 it was the subprime mortgages, but it could also have been something else. It just something happens that sets in motion a chain of events whereby people stop trusting each other and whereby you get this liquidity squeeze that I just described.
Okay, so did you feel in the sort of 2006, 2007 years, the build up towards the financial crisis, that there was something coming? Or is it rather that we were talking about a fragile system that was always able to break down?
There have been various instances where, as a financial services expert, you feel that the market, something is just not feeling right, and you cannot put your finger on it. I remember it was not particularly in 2008, but with the crisis before that for instance, lending money for banks basically became an unprofitable proposition where we had to lend out money at rates that just didn't cover our costs.
Sure.
And that is an unsustainable situation.
Okay.
Which at some point, as it goes with unsustainable situations, they're unsustainable, so they're going to blow up one day.
Okay, absolutely. So, in your opinion, then, how well was the 2008 crisis handled by the authorities? What did they do versus what they should have done?
when these things happen, it's very difficult, I think, to react correctly on the spot if you're unprepared. Like with every disaster,
Sure.
If you're not prepared, then it's very difficult to do the right thing. So given the fact that everybody was relatively unprepared, I guess they did pretty much what they were supposed to do. So we've had some moments that were pretty kind of scary, but it all kind of worked out okay for the time being.
And just for our viewers who may be too young to remember the 2008 crisis, amazingly 6 years ago already, what was the response to the crisis?
Well, basically the response was in various places, because it started in the US and then it blew over to Europe, and in different locations different banks went bankrupt. So the US had to do its part, bailing out some of its financial services organizations and rescuing some other ones of them, and as to which ones were saved and which ones were let go. There's still a lot of debate whether the right decisions have been taken, but a decision had to be taken at that point in time. So, did they take the right decision? I don't know. I guess we will never know. But they had to take a decision, and the crisis was more or less kind of put at ease. So I guess from that point of view, they've done the right thing. And the same thing happened in Europe. In Europe it was a little bit more complex because there were different. In the US, you have one government that basically, and one Fed that oversees everything that happens in the US, and to a certain extent even beyond the US. In Europe, you still very much have to do with local central banks and local regulators and local governments.
Would you mind taking a sort of guess at whether there will be another financial crisis similar to the one that we experienced last decade in this decade, and if so, what might it look like?
Well, I mean, if you look at history, it's inevitable we're going to have another one. So the question is not, are we going to have another one? The question is, when is it going to happen?
Sure.
And what is going to trigger it? I think if you look at the markets right now, there's a lot of unease in the market. So we can all feel something is brewing. There's little telltales where from which you can see that there's some unease. Stock markets are not going anywhere. They're moving laterally. At the moment, there's a lot of financial uncertainty in terms of spending and budgets. There's the problem of old age, kind of an increasing old population, and how we're going to finance the cost of that. There is all the money printing that's taking place, not only in the US but also in Europe now. So there's we are asking ourselves, all these things that we're seeing, how sustainable is this? And like we said before, if you feel that stuff is going on that is not sustainable, then it's going to go wrong. Now the interesting question is, when is it going to go wrong? We need another trigger, and that trigger can happen tomorrow. There can be an incident that sets things in motion that will start to take confidence away. I think we've had two near misses recently. I think the AirAsia Malaysian Airlines plane that was shot down over Russia, that could have escalated a conflict with Russia, which could have had a spillover into the financial markets, and of course the vote in Scotland. If Scotland would have voted for independence, I think that also could have been another trigger.
Absolutely.
They could have had a ramification onto the financial markets. And so I think we just have to wait for something to happen. And that can be next week. It can be next year. It can take another 5 years. But
okay, so it really sounds like the picture that you're painting is that it's almost impossible to predict what might trigger the next financial crisis, because it's fragile enough that almost anything can set it off.
Yeah.
In that case, what kind of investments make sense in that kind of climate?
Yeah, very difficult. I think what we're seeing at the moment already is that kind of more and more investors keep more in cash.
Okay.
That means that they want to be able to move quickly if something happens. So it means that everybody has this feeling. And I guess maybe that's helpful that everybody has that feeling, because it means that we're at least we're alert. We don't get taken by surprise.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're in cash is always king at the end of the day. So at least you can move quickly. I mean, of course, another question is, how much will your cash be worth, depending on the type of crisis.
Okay.
You're going to have. So if everybody all of a sudden loses confidence in the dollar, then you don't want to have dollars. Yeah, the assets, real assets have always kind of done well through crisis. So real assets as in property or cars or kind of gold and silver, or platinum, precious metals.
Sure.
So those, I would at least take part of my portfolio and invest that in real assets. And for the rest, keep a very good eye on what the Fed is doing and what the European Central Bank is doing. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, Otbert, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
All right, my pleasure.